The Tertian Summit occupied 3 entire levels of Apex 9, the neutral station that floated at the intersection of 6 major trade routes like a diplomatic spider at the center of its web. Dr. Jonas Reeve had been aboard for exactly 4 hours, and he was already overwhelmed by the sheer density of alien species, languages, and unspoken political currents swirling through the corridors. He'd studied for this. 6 months of intensive preparation, cultural briefings, protocol training, and language downloads that still gave him headaches when he tried accessing the creche vocabulary modules. But studying and experiencing were different things, and actually standing in the Grand Commons watching dozens of species negotiate in overlapping conversations was like trying to drink from a fire hose. Stay close, don't wander, and for the love of everything, don't talk to anyone without clearance, Ambassador Chen had told him during the shuttle ride up. We're here to observe, not participate. Earth's too new to this game to risk mistakes. Jonas had nodded, committed to being the most invisible diplomat in summit history, which was why he'd found this corner table, far from the central platforms where the important delegations postured and performed. From here, he could watch, learn, and avoid causing an interstellar incident through sheer ignorance. He was reviewing briefing files on his data pad when he noticed the change in atmosphere. Conversations didn't just pause, they stopped. Movement stilled. Even the serving drones seemed to slow their circuits through the commons. Jonas looked up to see what had caused the sudden silence and found Queen Isaveth of the Aethari Empire entering the commons. She moved like gravity had different rules for her, each step precise and unhurried. Her formal robes caught the station's ambient light, creating patterns that probably meant something in Aethari culture, but just looked expensive to Jonas's untrained eye. Her elongated ears swept back along her skull in a configuration he didn't recognize from his briefings, and her amber eyes scanned the room with the kind of attention that suggested she was cataloging threats and opportunities simultaneously. The crowd parted before her without anyone appearing to consciously move. She acknowledged no one, and no one approached her. Jonas watched her progress through the commons like a ship cutting through still water, and understood viscerally why Ambassador Chen had been so adamant about avoiding her. The Aethari Empire was old, not just centuries but millennia of continuous civilization. They'd been traveling between stars when humanity was still figuring out agriculture. Their technology was advanced, their military was formidable, and their tolerance for species they considered inferior was minimal. Queen Isaveth herself was legendary for her intelligence, her strategic brilliance, and her absolute intolerance for anything she perceived as weakness or stupidity. Everything in Jonas's briefings had been clear. The Aethari Queen was attending the summit as a formality, her presence a reminder of her empire's power, but she had no interest in humanity and less patience for humans who didn't understand their place in the galactic hierarchy. So when she stopped directly beside Jonas's corner table, he assumed she was passing through, perhaps heading for a private meeting space beyond the commons. He returned his attention to his data pad, determined to be so unremarkable she wouldn't even register his existence. Is this seat taken? Jonas's brain stuttered over the question, spoken in accented but perfect standard, because there was no possible universe in which Queen Isaveth of the Aethari Empire was asking him about an empty chair. He looked up, confirmed that yes, she was definitely addressing him, and his mouth engaged before his brain could stop it. No. No, it's not taken. She sat without waiting for further confirmation, arranging herself across from him with movements so controlled they looked choreographed. The commons, which had been silent before, now achieved a quality of quiet that suggested everyone had stopped breathing. Jonas could see Ambassador Chen across the room, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to catalog. He could see other delegates frozen mid-gesture, staring at the impossible sight of the Aethari Queen sitting with a human nobody at a corner table. Isaveth folded her hands on the table's surface and regarded Jonas with the kind of attention usually reserved for interesting specimens under laboratory conditions. He resisted the urge to squirm, kept his expression neutral, and wondered what exactly he'd done to warrant this kind of attention. "You are Dr. Jonas Reeve," she said. "Not a question." "Yes, Your Majesty." He had no idea if that was the correct form of address, but it seemed safer than "hey" or "ma'am." "You are here as part of Earth's new diplomatic delegation." "Yes." "And yet you sit alone in a corner, away from your own people, studying a data pad rather than engaging in the performative networking that occupies everyone else in this room." Jonas glanced around the commons, at the clusters of delegates engaged in intense conversations that were clearly about them now. "I'm new to this. I figured I'd cause less trouble observing from the margins." Her ears flicked forward and something that might have been approval crossed her face. "That is the first sensible thing I have heard a human say since arriving at this summit. I'll take that as a compliment." "You should." She leaned back slightly, her posture suggesting she was settling in for an extended conversation. "Tell me, Dr. Reeve, what do you think of the Tertian Summit so far?" This felt like a trap. Every instinct Jonas had developed during 6 months of diplomatic training was screaming that answering honestly was a terrible idea. But something about the directness of her gaze suggested she'd know immediately if he tried diplomatic deflection, and might find that more offensive than honesty. "I think it's overwhelming," he said carefully. "Dozens of species, hundreds of years of history between them, political currents I don't understand, and protocols I'm probably violating just by breathing wrong." "You are violating several protocols right now simply by maintaining this conversation," Isaveth informed him. "I am told humans were explicitly warned to avoid me." "We were, very explicitly. And yet you did not flee when I sat down." Jonas couldn't help the smile that tugged at his mouth. "You sat down pretty fast, Your Majesty. By the time I processed what was happening, leaving would have been ruder than staying." "Ruder than staying," she repeated, and something that might have been amusement flickered in her amber eyes. "Yes, that logic is very human, prioritizing social awkwardness over self-preservation. Is talking to you really that dangerous? For your diplomatic career, potentially catastrophic." She gestured subtly at the commons, where the frozen tableau was beginning to dissolve into urgent whispered conversations. "For your immediate survival, no. I do not kill people for conversation, regardless of what your briefings might have suggested." They were actually pretty vague on the killing thing, more focused on the "don't embarrass Earth" angle. "And you believe sitting with me embarrasses your planet. I believe sitting with you is giving Ambassador Chen a stroke, but that's different." Isaveth's laugh surprised them both, a short, genuine sound that cut through the commons like a bell. Several nearby delegates actually jumped. Jonas watched her ears cycle through several positions before settling into something that looked almost relaxed. "Dr. Reeve, I am going to tell you something that will complicate your time at this summit considerably," she said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I chose to sit here specifically because you were alone, because everyone else in this room is performing for audience and advantage, and I wanted one conversation that might be genuine. Do you understand what that means?" Jonas looked around the commons, at the hundreds of eyes watching them, at Ambassador Chen, who appeared to be having a quiet crisis, at the other Aethari delegates who looked as shocked as everyone else. "It means you just made me the most talked-about person at the summit, and I have no idea why." "Good. You understand consequences even if you do not yet understand motivations." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about Earth's literature. I have been reading your cultural files, and I find your approach to fictional narrative fascinating." And just like that, as the diplomatic world imploded around them, Queen Isaveth of the Aethari Empire asked Jonas about books. He answered, because what else could he do, and discovered that she'd apparently read more human literature than he had, with opinions on everything from ancient epics to contemporary science fiction. They talked for 30 minutes while the summit watched, and Jonas realized that whatever he'd been warned about, whatever he'd expected, Queen Isaveth was nothing like the cold, dismissive ruler his briefings had described. She was curious, sharp-witted, and surprisingly easy to talk to once you got past the terror. When Ambassador Chen finally worked up the courage to approach their table, his diplomatic smile was so forced it looked painful. "Your Majesty, please forgive any presumption on Dr. Reeve's part, if he has imposed upon your time, Ambassador Chen." Isaveth's voice could have frozen hydrogen. "Dr. Reeve did not invite me to sit here. I chose this seat. If you have concerns about my choice of company, you are welcome to file a formal complaint with the Aethari Diplomatic Corps. I'm certain they will give it all the attention it deserves." Chen retreated so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. Isaveth returned her attention to Jonas, her expression softening back to something almost friendly. "Where were we?" "Ah, yes. You were explaining why human narratives so often focus on individuals changing vast systems through personal choice, rather than accepting established hierarchy." Jonas, who just watched a queen demolish his boss with 6 sentences, took a breath and continued their conversation about literature, philosophy, and the strange intersection of human chaos and galactic order. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered what exactly he'd stumbled into and whether he'd survive it. By the second day of the summit, Jonas had accepted that his life had become surreal. Queen Isaveth continued to seek him out for conversations, not just once, but repeatedly, appearing at meals, during breaks between sessions, even once in the station's observation deck where he'd gone to clear his head. Other delegates had stopped merely staring and started approaching, ostensibly to pay respects to the Queen, but clearly trying to understand what was happening. Isaveth deflected them all with practiced efficiency, maintaining her focus on Jonas in a way that suggested their conversations were genuinely more interesting than diplomatic maneuvering. "You're making me incredibly popular," Jonas told her during one such interruption, after a Torvash trade minister had bowed his way backward from their table in the station's cafe. "I've had more people want to talk to me in 2 days than in my entire previous career." "They want to understand why I'm talking to you," Isaveth corrected, sipping something that looked like liquid starlight from a crystalline cup. "They assume I must be maneuvering for advantage, positioning the Aethari to manipulate naive humanity for our benefit. Are you? If I were, would I tell you? Probably not, but I figured I'd ask." Her ears flicked in what he'd learned was amusement. "No, Dr. Reeve, I am not manipulating you for imperial advantage. I am, however, signaling something to this summit, and you are the unwitting vehicle for that signal. That sounds only slightly better than being manipulated." "It should, because what I'm signaling is that the Aethari Empire has assessed humanity and found you more promising than most delegates assume." She set down her cup with precise care. "Do you know why Earth was invited to this summit? Official reason or actual reason? You understand there's a difference. Good, give me both." Jonas leaned back, grateful for the diplomatic training that had at least prepared him for this kind of question. "Official reason. Earth has reached sufficient technological and social development to participate in galactic commerce. Actual reason. Several major powers see humanity as a potential ally or threat and want us inside the system where we can be observed and influenced." "Mostly correct. You missed the third reason." "Which is?" "Entertainment." Isaveth's smile was sharp. "Humans are chaos incarnate. You achieve things that should be impossible through methods that make no strategic sense. You form alliances based on sentiment rather than advantage. You solve problems through creative rule-breaking that older civilizations would never attempt. Watching humanity interact with galactic civilization is like watching a chemical reaction. We're not sure if you'll catalyze progress or explode spectacularly, but it will definitely be interesting." "That's actually kind of insulting." "Yes, but it's also accurate, And more importantly, it's why I'm sitting with you." She leaned forward, her expression intensifying. "The Aethari Empire has spent 3,000 years perfecting our civilization. We have optimized governance, streamlined cultural development, eliminated the chaotic variables that plague younger species. We are efficient, powerful, and utterly stagnant." Jonas blinked. "Did you just admit your empire is stagnant?" "I am stating an observable fact. When a civilization eliminates all risk, it also eliminates growth. We have not had a genuinely new idea in 500 years. We refine, we optimize, we perfect what already exists. But innovation, true creative breakthrough, that requires the kind of productive chaos we bred out of our culture generations ago. And you think humanity has that? I know humanity has that. I've been watching your development for 15 years, Dr. Reeve. I've seen you solve resource crises through approaches no established civilization would attempt. I've watched you form cooperative agreements between groups that should be enemies by all rational calculation. I've observed you take scientific principles and apply them in ways that make our researchers simultaneously impressed and horrified." She picked up her cup again, regarding him over its rim. "You asked me yesterday why I'm interested in humanity when my empire views you as insignificant. The answer is that insignificant species don't get invited to summits. You're here because enough major powers recognize that humanity matters, even if they won't say it openly. And I chose to sit with you because I wanted to signal where the Aethari Empire stands on that assessment. Which is that we're willing to invest in humanity's potential rather than dismiss you as chaotic newcomers. That we recognize value in approaches different from our own. And that we're curious to see what happens when human chaos meets galactic order." Her smile softened slightly. "Also, you are more interesting to talk to than 90% of the delegates here, and I have sat through enough performative diplomatic sessions to last several lifetimes." Jonas laughed despite himself. "So I'm both a political signal and entertainment. I'm not sure if that's better or worse than being manipulated." "It is better, because my interest is genuine even if it serves multiple purposes." She finished her drink, and the trade route allocation session was, as Isaveth had predicted, educational in the way that watching a controlled demolition was educational. The creche had presented a carefully constructed argument for why developing species, meaning humanity, shouldn't receive primary route access, citing resource limitations and security concerns that sounded reasonable until Isaveth systematically dismantled them. She did it without raising her voice, without obvious emotion, simply by pointing out the logical inconsistencies and unstated assumptions underlying every argument. By the time she finished, the creche delegation looked like they'd been hit by a diplomatic freight train, and Earth's petition had gained support from 3 additional voting blocks. Ambassador Chen found Jonas after the session, his expression caught between gratitude and terror. "What did you do?" Chen demanded, pulling Jonas into a side corridor. "I sat at a table. She sat down. We talked about books. Books? And philosophy, and human narrative structures, and why we approach problem-solving differently than established civilizations." Chen stared at him. "Dr. Reeve, do you understand what just happened in that chamber? Queen Isaveth just used the Aethari Empire's considerable influence to support Earth's interests, and she did it in front of the entire summit. Do you have any idea what that means? That we're not as irrelevant as everyone assumed. That we're now attached to the Aethari political position whether we want to be or not. That other delegations will assume we've formed an alliance, that we'll be expected to support Aethari interests in return, that we've been pulled into galactic politics at the highest levels before we're remotely ready." Chen ran a hand through his hair. "We came here to observe, Jonas, to learn the system before trying to play the game. Now we're pieces on a board we don't understand because a queen decided she likes talking to you about literature. Should I stop talking to her? Can you?" Jonas thought about Isaveth's directness, her genuine curiosity, the way she'd chosen to sit with him specifically, because she wanted real conversation rather than diplomatic performance. Probably not, she seems pretty determined. Then we adapt. Chen's expression shifted from panic to calculation. If the Aethari Queen wants to elevate humanity's position, we'd be fools not to leverage that. But Jonas, be careful. Queens don't do things without reasons, and genuine interest doesn't mean safe. I know. Do you? Because you're smiling right now, and I'm not sure if that's confidence or shock. Jonas considered the question honestly. Little of both, probably. But ambassador, she's not what the briefings described. She's brilliant, yes, and powerful, but she's also curious and kind of funny, and she seems genuinely interested in what humanity might contribute to galactic civilization. That's worth something. It's worth everything if it's real and catastrophic if it's manipulation. I guess we'll find out which. Over the following days, Jonas discovered that having Queen Isaveth's attention came with complications and opportunities in equal measure. Delegates who'd previously ignored Earth's representatives now sought meetings. Trade discussions that had been postponed indefinitely suddenly found schedule openings. Even species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence started treating Earth's petition with serious consideration. But there was also tension. The Kresh delegation submitted a formal complaint about Aethari interference in summit proceedings. 3 smaller allied blocs voiced concerns about larger empires using developing species as proxies. And within Earth's own delegation, some members questioned whether Isaveth's support came with strings attached that would limit humanity's independence. Jonas brought these concerns to Isaveth during one of their now regular conversations in the station's observation deck. She listened without interruption, her ears cycling through several positions, then asked a question that surprised him. "Do you trust me, Dr. Reeve? I don't know you well enough to answer that honestly." "Good. Blind trust is stupid, and I would be disappointed if you offered it." She turned to face the viewport, where stars streamed past in patterns created by the station's orbit. "Let me offer you something rare in diplomatic circles. Complete honesty about my motivations. Okay, I am 347 years old by your calendar. I have ruled the Aethari Empire for 70 years. I have negotiated treaties, commanded fleets, built alliances, and occasionally destroyed them when necessary. I am very good at what I do, and I am profoundly tired of doing it within the constraints of a system that values stability over growth." She glanced at him. "When I read the reports about humanity's petition to join the summit, I saw an opportunity, not to manipulate you, but to introduce a variable that might disrupt the stagnant equilibrium that has governed galactic politics for centuries. Your species is unpredictable, creative, and willing to question assumptions that others accept as fundamental truth. That makes you either a catalyst for change or a source of chaos that will damage the existing system. And you're betting on catalyst. I am betting that even if humanity proves to be chaos rather than catalyst, the disruption will be valuable. Systems that cannot adapt to disruption deserve to fail." Her expression softened. "But Jonas, my interest in you specifically is not strategic. You are thoughtful, honest, and willing to engage with ideas rather than just defending positions. Talking with you is genuinely pleasant, which is rare enough that I'm willing to sit through the political complications it creates. So your support for Earth is strategic, but your conversations with me are personal." "Yes, both things can be true simultaneously. I can appreciate you as an individual while also recognizing that our friendship serves larger purposes." Jonas thought about that, watching stars streak past the viewport. Friendship, that's an interesting word choice. Is it inaccurate? No, just unexpected. Queens don't usually become friends with junior diplomats from species they barely acknowledge. Queens who want to remain relevant to changing circumstances do. Isaveth turned fully toward him. In 3 days, The summit will vote on resource allocation for developing species. Earth's petition will either pass or fail based on how many voting blocks I can persuade to support it. If it passes, humanity will have access to resources, routes, and opportunities that will accelerate your development significantly. If it fails, you will remain marginal players in galactic civilization for at least another generation. No pressure, considerable pressure actually. But Jonas, regardless of how that vote goes, I want you to understand something. I chose to sit with you not despite the warnings, but because of them. Because the instinct to avoid and dismiss is exactly what keeps galactic civilization locked in patterns that no longer serve progress. Someone needed to break that pattern, and I decided it would be me. She extended her hand, and gesture she'd learned humans used for agreements and connection. Jonas took it, felt the warmth of her skin, the slight tremor that suggested this gesture meant something to her too. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet. The vote may still go badly, and then you'll be associated with a failed initiative and a queen who bet wrong. Then we'll fail together. That's still better than not trying." Her ears lifted fully, and her smile was genuine. "Yes, that is a very human perspective, and exactly why I think your species will ultimately prove to be the catalyst I'm hoping for." They stood together in the observation deck, hands still clasped, watching stars stream past while somewhere on other levels of the station, delegates debated and maneuvered and prepared for a vote that would determine whether humanity's gamble on galactic civilization would succeed or fail. The vote took place in the summit's main council chamber, a vast space designed to accommodate hundreds of delegates from dozens of species. Jonas sat in Earth's designated section, surrounded by his delegation, trying to look calm while his stomach attempted to escape through his throat. The resource allocation petition had been debated for hours, with delegates presenting arguments for and against supporting developing species. Some argued for investment in potential. Others claimed limited resources required focus on established civilizations. The Kresh delegation made one last attempt to exclude humanity specifically, citing concerns about human unpredictability and insufficient cultural development. Then Queen Isaveth requested the floor. She stood in the Aethari section, her formal robes catching light in ways that made her seem to glow. When she spoke, her voice carried across the chamber without amplification, each word precisely chosen and delivered with absolute confidence. "Delegates of the Tertian Summit, I have listened to 3 hours of debate about resource allocation, and I have heard the same arguments that have been made at every summit for the past 200 years. Investment is risk. Resources are limited. Developing species may fail. We should focus on proven returns rather than uncertain potential." She paused, letting silence fill the chamber. These arguments are logical, risk-averse, and fundamentally short-sighted. They prioritize the comfort of the present over the possibilities of the future. They mistake stability for wisdom and caution for strategy. The Aethari Empire has existed for 3 millennia. We have perfected our systems, optimized our governance, and eliminated inefficiency from our civilization. And in doing so, we have become exactly what these arguments advocate: stable, predictable, and utterly incapable of genuine innovation. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Aethari delegates in her own section looked shocked that their queen was admitting weakness publicly. I am not suggesting the Aethari model is wrong, but I am stating that it is incomplete. We have achieved mastery of what we know, but we have lost the capacity to discover what we don't know. And that is where developing species offer value that established civilizations cannot replicate. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the chamber until it found Jonas. Humanity is chaotic. They solve problems through methods that make no sense by our established frameworks. They form connections based on sentiment rather than advantage. They take risks that seem reckless and occasionally achieve results that seem impossible. I have spent the past week speaking with Dr. Jonas Reeve, a human diplomat who came to this summit expecting to observe from the margins. I chose to sit with him specifically because everyone warned me not to, because I wanted to understand what humanity offers that might be worth the risk everyone seems so afraid of taking. What I discovered is that humans ask questions we stopped asking centuries ago. They challenge assumptions we've accepted as fundamental truth. They approach problems with fresh perspectives precisely because they don't know enough to recognize what should be impossible. Isaveth's voice intensified. The question before us is not whether humanity deserves support. The question is whether this summit has the courage to invest in potential rather than just maintaining what already exists. Whether we can recognize that the chaos of development is not a flaw to be avoided, but an opportunity to introduce the kind of dynamic change that stagnant systems desperately need. She moved to the center of the chamber, claiming space with absolute authority. The Aethari Empire casts its vote in support of Earth's petition, not because we expect immediate returns, not because we've negotiated secret advantages, but because we recognize that if galactic civilization cannot adapt to include new approaches, new perspectives, and new possibilities, then we deserve the stagnation we've created. I chose to sit with a human when everyone said I shouldn't. I chose to engage with chaos when stability was safer. And I have found that choice more valuable than 200 years of careful, predictable diplomatic maneuvering. She returned to her section, her robes settling around her like a crown. Support this petition or don't, but understand that your vote is not just about resources. It's about whether we're still capable of growing or whether we've decided that the universe we've built is already complete. The chamber erupted in discussion. Jonas watched delegates arguing, recalculating, reassessing positions in real time. Ambassador Chen gripped his shoulder, whether in support or panic Jonas couldn't tell. The vote was called. Blocks announced their positions one by one, the tally building slowly on the chamber's central display. Earth needed 60% support to pass. The numbers climbed, 40%, 50, 55. Jonas stopped breathing somewhere around 58%. When the final block announced support, bringing the total to 62%, the chamber exploded in reaction. Earth's delegation was celebrating, several members openly crying. The creche looked furious. Other delegations seemed stunned that the vote had actually passed, and Queen Isaveth, sitting in her section with perfect composure, caught Jonas's eye across the chamber and smiled. This response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message. Hit continue to nudge Claude along. Continue celebration lasted through the evening. Earth's delegation hosted an impromptu reception that became the summit's social event, with delegates from supporting blocks congratulating humanity on their success. Jonas fielded questions, accepted congratulations, and tried to process the reality that his species had just been given a legitimate chance at galactic civilization. He found Isaveth later that night, back in the observation deck where they'd had so many conversations. She was standing at the viewport, watching stars, and didn't turn when he approached. That was quite a speech, Jonas said, stopping beside her. It was necessary. The summit needed to understand what was actually being decided. You know they're going to hold you to that, right? The Aethari Empire just publicly committed to supporting human chaos. Good, my empire needs the disruption, whether they realize it yet or not. She glanced at him. What happens now, Dr. Reeve? Now humanity has 4 years of supported development, access to resources and routes, and the chance to prove we're worth the investment. No pressure. Considerable pressure, actually, but I believe you'll manage. Because humans are chaotic catalysts. Because you, specifically, have demonstrated the capacity to see past what you were told to what might be possible. She turned to face him fully. You were warned to stay away from me. Everyone made it clear that associating with the Aethari Queen was dangerous for your career and potentially disastrous for your species. And yet when I sat across from you at that table, you chose conversation over fear. I chose not to be rude. There's a difference. No, Jonas. You chose to treat me as a person rather than a political entity. That's the